They didn't come with weapons. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They came with paper. When the sun rose, the land was no longer his. The field stretched exactly the same way it had the day before. The soil hadn't moved. The fences still stood. The path he walked every morning was unchanged. But something invisible had shifted during the night. Ownership, or rather, permission. He noticed the marker first. A wooden stake driven into the ground near the edge of the field. A seal pressed into wax, already cooling in the morning air. He didn't need to read it to understand what it meant. Authority had arrived while he slept. In medieval times, land was not something you owned. It was something you were allowed to work. And permission could be withdrawn quietly, efficiently, without confrontation. He had missed a payment. Not a rebellion. Not a refusal. A delay. A few coins short. A season too weak. A tool that broke when there was no money left to replace it. He had planned to recover. Everyone planned to recover. But the system never waited for plans. This is the story of a man who believed land meant stability, and learned that land was simply another instrument of control. And when it was taken, it wasn't taken violently. It was taken overnight. The land had been worked by his family longer than anyone could remember. His grandfather had worked it. His father had worked it. And from the moment he was old enough to carry tools, he worked it too. People said it was their land, but everyone understood what that meant. It meant they worked it. It did not mean they owned it. Ownership belonged elsewhere, to a name that rarely appeared, to a lord who did not walk the soil, to a system that treated land not as livelihood but as leverage. Each year, he paid for the privilege of staying where he was born. Rent to the Lord, tax to the crown, tithe to the church. 3 payments that came before food, before repair, before rest. The land produced just enough to survive when nothing went wrong, and something always went wrong. A dry season. Too much rain, illness, broken tools. The margin was so thin that stability was an illusion people learned to believe in order to survive another year. Land was not security, it was exposure. And the closer you lived to the edge, the faster the system noticed when you slipped. The payment wasn't refused. That distinction mattered. Refusal was rebellion. Rebellion invited force. Refusal was loud, visible, and often short-lived. This was different. This was an absence. The coins simply weren't there. The season had been wrong from the beginning. Rain came late, then came too much. Part of the crop drowned before it could grow. Another part withered, waiting for water that never arrived at the right time. He adjusted where he could, worked longer days, took smaller meals, reused tools past the point of safety. It wasn't enough. When the time came to set aside money for the payment, there was a gap he couldn't close. A few coins missing. An amount small enough to feel temporary, manageable, recoverable. He told himself it would be fine. Everyone did. The system encouraged that thought without ever saying it out loud. There were stories, always stories, of people who caught up later, who worked an extra season, who borrowed briefly and survived. Hope didn't need to be true. It only needed to be believable. He planned carefully, calculated what could be sold, what could wait, what might still come in before the next visit. He spoke to no one about it. Silence was safer than sympathy. Sympathy traveled, and attention was dangerous. Days passed. Then weeks. No one came. No warnings were delivered. No reminders posted. No knock on the door. That silence should have been comforting. Instead, it pressed down on him. In a fair system, silence meant patience. In this one, silence meant paperwork. Somewhere his name was being adjusted, numbers recalculated, margins removed. The system didn't chase people who fell behind. It recorded them. He kept working the land as if nothing had changed. Because on the surface, nothing had. The soil still needed turning. The crop still demanded care. The routine didn't allow room for panic, but something had shifted internally. Every task now carried weight. Every action felt provisional. He noticed it when he hesitated before repairing a fence, when he delayed replacing a broken handle, when he chose not to buy seed he would have bought before. He was no longer planning a future on the land. He was bracing for loss. At night, he replayed the numbers over and over. What if the harvest improved? What if he sold early? What if he borrowed? Borrowing meant obligation. Obligation meant records. Records meant visibility. Visibility was the real danger. The delay stretched longer than he expected. Long enough for the initial panic to dull into a quieter fear. Long enough for him to believe, briefly, that maybe the system had overlooked him. That was the illusion it offered. Not mercy, neglect, but neglect was just preparation. The system never forgot. It only waited for the right moment to act, when resistance was lowest, when energy was gone, when acceptance felt easier than outrage. The payment was late, and lateness in this world was not forgiven. It was converted. They didn't come when he was awake. They came when the village was quiet, when fires burned low and doors stayed shut, when confrontation required effort and witnesses required intention. Night was efficient. It wasn't soldiers who arrived. Soldiers made noise. Soldiers created memory. This required neither. They were clerks. Men with ink-stained fingers and neutral expressions. Men who knew the value of silence and the power of procedure. They moved calmly, without urgency, without emotion. They didn't knock on his door. They didn't need to. Their work wasn't with him. It was with the land. By the time dawn approached, the changes were already complete. A marker was placed where it would be seen first. Near the path he always walked. Near the edge of the field that caught the earliest light. Wax cooled, seals set, numbers finalized. They worked with practiced efficiency, careful not to damage anything. Damage implied force. Force implied resistance. This wasn't punishment. It was adjustment. Inside his home, he slept lightly, waking once with a sense of unease he couldn't name. He didn't rise. He couldn't have known what was happening without stepping outside, and no one stepped outside at night unless they had nothing left to lose. By morning, the land had changed hands without changing shape. That was the brilliance of it. Nothing looked different. The field didn't bear scars. The crops didn't wither instantly. The fences didn't fall. The world continued exactly as it had the day before. Only the relationship had changed. He saw the marker as soon as he stepped outside, stopped mid-step, stood longer than he should have. Understanding came slowly, like cold. He knew the seal. Everyone did. It meant reassignment. Temporary at first, conditional, but temporary in this system had a way of becoming permanent. The land was no longer his responsibility, which also meant it was no longer his protection. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded in layers. First came disbelief, then calculation, then fear. He told himself there must be a mistake. Errors happened, papers were misfiled, numbers misread. But mistakes were loud. This was quiet. He walked the edge of the field carefully, afraid to cross a line he couldn't see. The land felt the same under his feet, but his body reacted as if it belonged to someone else. Ownership was invisible, but obedience was physical. By midday, someone came, not to explain, to remind. The words were polite, formal, final. He no longer had permission to work the land. He wasn't accused, he wasn't shamed, he wasn't threatened. He was informed. The system didn't need him to understand why. It only needed him to comply. When the man left, the field remained, unchanged, productive, ready for someone else. He stood there until the sun moved overhead, trying to decide what came next. The answer was nothing. Without land, there was no work that didn't belong to someone else. Without work, there was no money that wasn't already promised away. Without money, there was no leverage. The loss wasn't dramatic, it was complete. That night, the land slept under a new assumption, that it would continue to be worked, continue to produce, continue to serve the system exactly as before. Only the worker had changed, and the system did not record that as a loss. The next morning arrived without ceremony. The sun rose as it always did. The air carried the same damp smell of soil and plants. Birds moved across the field as if nothing had changed. But everything had. He woke early, not because there was work to do, but because habit did not understand loss. His body moved before his mind could intervene. He reached for his clothes, his boots, his tools, then stopped. For the first time in his life, he didn't know where to go. The land was still there, close enough to touch, close enough to remember. But distance had been replaced by something more final than space. Permission. He walked toward the field anyway. Slowly, carefully, as if approaching an injured animal that might still be alive. He stayed on the path, not crossing the invisible line that now mattered more than fences ever had. From a distance, he watched others move across the soil. They weren't strangers. He recognized their posture, their tools, the way they tested the ground before committing their weight. They were like him. Or rather, they had been him. Temporary workers. Men who borrowed labor from whoever still had permission to give it. The field had not waited for him. It never did. By mid-morning, someone noticed him standing there. Not aggressively, just standing too long, too still, watching. A man approached, younger, better fed. He carried himself with the confidence of someone whose survival was not in question that day. The conversation was brief, polite words, clear boundaries. He was told again that he could not work there, that the land had been reassigned. That lingering could be misunderstood. Misunderstanding was dangerous. He nodded. He always nodded. Disobedience required energy he could not afford. Walking away felt worse than being turned away. Turning his back on the land meant acknowledging that it was truly gone, that whatever claim his memory had no longer mattered. Without land, time stretched oddly. Hours lost their structure. Without tasks tied to soil and season, the day became shapeless. He wandered the village, careful not to look idle. Idleness invited suspicion. He asked quietly for work, carrying, repairing, digging. Most said no, not unkindly, just cautiously. Work meant responsibility. Responsibility meant risk. Finally, someone offered him a day's labor. Enough to eat, not enough to plan. The payment was small and immediate. No promises, no continuation. That night, he ate bread that tasted unfamiliar. The cost felt higher than the hunger it solved. He slept poorly. Without land, sleep had no anchor. Tomorrow was undefined. And in this system, undefined was dangerous. Landlessness changed everything without changing much. He still woke early, still searched for work, still counted coins carefully, but the margins were gone. Without land, every meal had a price. Every night required negotiation. Shelter became temporary. Relationships became transactional. The village had not expelled him. It didn't need to. Poverty carried its own gravity. He learned quickly where he was welcome and where he was tolerated. He learned not to linger in doorways, not to ask twice, not to complain. He sold what little he had left. Tools first. Tools could be replaced, he told himself. They couldn't. Without tools, his labor became cheaper. With cheaper labor came less choice. The system adjusted again. His debt did not disappear with the land. It followed him, redefined to fit his new status. Numbers were updated, obligations recalculated. Loss did not erase responsibility. It intensified it. He moved often. Staying too long in one place raised questions. Questions led to records. Records led back to authority. Anonymity was survival. Days blurred together. Weeks passed unnoticed. He measured time by exhaustion instead of seasons. He aged faster. Without land, the future shrank. Planning became impossible. Saving became absurd. Every decision solved only the present moment. Hunger became familiar, not dramatic, just persistent. The village did not hate him. That would have required emotion. It simply adjusted around him. Others watched and learned. One missed payment. One marker in the ground. One life quietly removed from stability. The lesson was effective. The system did not need violence to maintain order. It only needed examples. He thought about the land often, not with anger, with something closer to disbelief, as if it had belonged to someone else his entire life and he had simply misunderstood. That too was part of the design. Memory softened loss. Confusion replaced outrage. Eventually, even the idea of reclaiming the land felt childish, unrealistic, something meant for stories, not life. The system did not break him quickly. It wore him down patiently. And in that patience, it succeeded. Loss did not arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly in ways that were easy to ignore at first and impossible to reverse later. At the beginning, he told himself this was temporary, that landlessness was a phase, not a sentence, that people fell and rose again, that effort still mattered. That belief carried him through the first weeks. He worked wherever work appeared, carried loads others didn't want, dug ditches that paid little and ended quickly. He learned to accept payment in food instead of coins when coins weren't offered. Food kept him alive. Coins kept him visible. Visibility was dangerous. Without a fixed place, his name began to drift. Records lagged behind reality. That gave him space, but it also erased him. Without land, without regular payment, without a fixed obligation, he became less legible to the system. That invisibility felt like freedom at first. It wasn't. Invisible people had no leverage, no claims, no patience extended to them. When work was scarce, he waited. When waiting failed, he moved. The village grew smaller with every return. Familiar faces became cautious. Not unkind, just careful. Carefulness was survival. He noticed the change in how people spoke to him. Conversations shortened. Offers grew conditional. Doors closed earlier. Not because of him, but because of what he represented: instability. The system did not need to punish him further. His position did that on its own. As months passed, his body changed. Without consistent food and rest, small injuries lingered. A cut took longer to close. A strain never fully healed. He learned to work through pain because pain was cheaper than hunger. He aged without milestones. No seasons marked progress anymore. Time became a sequence of endurance. What hurt most was not the work. It was the absence of future. When he had land, even when it was precarious, there was a sense of continuity, a next planting, a next harvest. Something that followed effort, even if reward did not. Now effort ended with the day. Nothing carried over. The system had achieved something subtle and devastating. It removed not just his land, but his timeline. He stopped thinking in years, then in months. Eventually he thought only in days. That was when resignation began to feel reasonable. Not surrender, something quieter. Acceptance. He stopped asking about the land, stopped checking the field, stopped imagining paths back. The land continued to be worked. He saw it from a distance once, thriving under hands that looked like his own had looked not long ago. It did not recognize him. Neither did the system. Loss did not destroy him. It reduced him. And reduction was the goal. That was the truth no one spoke openly. Land was never meant to secure people. It was meant to anchor them. The system did not reward loyalty. It rewarded predictability. People who stayed where they were born, worked where they were assigned, and paid without asking questions were easy to manage. Land created that obedience. Give someone something to lose, and they will protect the system that threatens to take it away. Take it quietly when they falter, and others will learn faster than punishment ever could teach. The land was not taken because he was weak. It was taken because he was replaceable. Another worker filled his place within days. Another family believed the same lie he once believed, that effort would be enough, that stability was real, that land meant safety. The system depended on that belief renewing itself. Without it, people would stop complying. This was not chaos. It was design. A system built on money did not need violence to control most people. It needed paperwork, timing, and patience. The marker in the field was more effective than chains. Years later, if anyone remembered him at all, they would remember him as someone who lost his land, as if it were an accident, a misstep, a personal failure, that language mattered. If loss was personal, the system remained innocent. If loss was structural, the system was guilty. The system could not allow that distinction to spread. So stories softened, details blurred, responsibility shifted, and life continued. The field produced. Payments were made. Authority remained intact. Only one life was erased from stability. That was an acceptable cost. If you want to understand how money turned land into leverage, how one missed payment erased generations overnight, and how survival depended not on effort but on permission, subscribe, because this wasn't an exception. It was the rule.